Hey everybody, how's it going? So I want to talk to you guys about a couple of key vocabulary terms that sound guys in training should know and musicians everywhere should know, so that when we all communicate with one another, we are all together and everyone is on the same page. I've been getting a lot of comments in the videos about what do I mean by terms like striking the kit? What do I mean by stage time? What do I mean by all of this? So today in this video, I'm going to explain to you guys what all of this means. I also figured, since I have to clean the place because tomorrow night we have a hip hop show here, and for the price of me not working that show because I simply refuse to work hip hop shows, I will use this chance to get the venue clean and ready to go, because whoever is the unlucky soul that is working that show tomorrow, they can at least have a clean workspace. I have all of this to clean. I just got to get the 3 vocal mics set up in the front of the stage, because tomorrow's hip hop. I'm going to get all these cabs out of the way and I need to strike the drum set. And what is striking? I'll explain that in a little bit. Let's go with the very first phrase that you sound guys definitely need to know, and that is call time. What is call time? Call time is when you arrive to work. Whether you are working at a venue, you are working for a production company, or you are just working a stage or a theater show, call time is when you show up. At least in the terms of live sound, call time is when I show up. So if there was a load-in time of 6:30 p.m., what that means is my call time would be 6 p.m. And why is that? For sound guys everywhere, a call time means you have between a half an hour, 45 minutes, or maybe even an hour to make sure your PA is working, all of your cables are routed correctly, and you are set to go for when the first band arrives, either for sound check or for a load-in if you are a local showcase and no band is getting a sound check. So that is call time. Now let's talk about load-in time. What is load-in time? Load-in time, for you bands out there, load-in time is the time when you are supposed to arrive at the venue. By this time, the sound guy has already taken care of his or her pre-show checklist. They are all set and ready to go. The PA system is loaded. Every loose cable is either where they should be or wound up. And the PA is on, ready to go, ready for you guys to do your thing. So load-in time is when you arrive at the venue. And why is load-in time important? Because if you show up late for load-in, there's a chance that you might miss an opportunity to get sound checked. Now, to further explain what I mean by this, my call-in time for this specific show today was 4 p.m. because the load-in time was 4:30. I arrived a little after 4, and I made sure that the stage was clear, everything was ready to go. Since I am not the only sound guy that works here, I don't know what the stage is looking like when I arrive. I don't know what show we had the night before, but because I was here the night before, I know exactly how the stage was, because I left it like that. So that is call time and load-in time. That is for both the bands and the sound guy or girl that is working the show that night. Let's stick with time and go to doors. Now, what do I mean by when I say doors? If a venue says doors are 7, that means that the doors to the venue are open at 7, and people with tickets can start coming into the venue and getting ready to watch the show. For this show tonight, a typical locals only show here, my call time is 6 p.m. Load-in for bands is 6:30, and doors are at 7. I always make sure that whatever band is playing on stage has time to get a monitor check, a levels check, and I'm able to get my mix out there. That's just how I operate. I just want to make sure that the bands have ample amount of time to make sure that they get sound checked, they sound good, and they're happy with how they sound on stage. Now let's go from direct communication from the sound guy to the bands. Let's start with two words that sound very, very similar, but for my personal use of these phrases and in my experience of using it, they are two completely different things. The first is stage time. Now, what is stage time? Stage time to me is the time that the band needs to be on the stage, ready to go, tuned up, amps on, ready to play. Stage time is your go time for when you guys start playing. That is stage time. Now let's talk about set time. Some venues and some sound guys have used set times to describe what I call stage time. But for me, set time is how long the band has to play. So if I say to a band, your stage time is 8 and you have a set time of 30 minutes, that means you are on the stage at 8 o'clock, ready to play, and your set time is 30 minutes, which means you are off the stage and you are done playing at 8:30. Give or take about 10-15 minutes. You have 10 to 15 minutes to get your stuff off the stage for the next band. So that is set time and stage time. Now let's talk about the one thing that you guys comment on the most, and that is striking. Now, what I mean by striking the drums is exactly what I'm about to do right now with our house kit, and that's take it off the stage. That is what striking means. Striking in stage terms and theater, TV, broadcasting, striking the set means that you are getting the stage ready for anything that the production needs. So when it comes to live sound, striking the stage means you are removing any and all pieces of equipment, cables, etc. from the stage. In terms of what I'm doing with our house drum kit right now, I am striking it from the drum riser. Now, depending on the venue and who you're working with, the venue may have a policy like this one where we have a backline and every local band is using our backline, which means our cabs or our drums. Now, some venues have amps, pedals, snares, whatever. Our venue, we have cabs and shells. So we tell every local band that comes here, bring your guitar and bass amp heads, your cymbals on your stands, and your snare drum and your pedals. We have everything else. But some venues, like I said, are more high-tech. They have more gear for the bands to use, and they are able to accommodate almost anybody. Again, it depends on what venue you work at and what venue you're playing at that night. Now, let's talk about stage layout. So, backstage, or what I always call backstage, technically some people call it back of house, but I always call it backstage. Now let's move from backstage or back of house to the stage itself. There are two ways of looking at how stage layouts go. There's from the point of view of front of house, which is where the sound guy and the booth is. That's where the sound guy is at. Front of house is the position of the console and the literal front of the venue. House is the venue. So that's front of house. Back of house. What do you suppose the front of the stage is? If you guessed front stage or stage front, you're right. And that is backstage. Now here's where a lot of bands sometimes get confused. When I say stage left, what I mean by that is stage left means I'm looking from point of view of the stage or house and the direction of which it is. So if I say stage left, I am on stage facing front of house, which means stage left is over here and stage right is over there. Now, if I'm talking house left, it would be, now let's just pretend I'm looking at the stage now from my point of view of front of house. House left is over there, house right is over there. It sometimes gets a little confusing for people, but that's what that means. Now, I mentioned it a couple of times, but let's talk about backline. Now, what does that mean? Backline is whatever gear is on the stage that the venue is providing or what the touring band is bringing with them. So if a touring band comes in here and they say, hey, we have our own backline, what they mean by that is they have their own cabs, their own drums, and they have their own gear. And usually we would put their backline in the back of the stage and move my house gear more towards the front of the stage so that they can leave their backline up there. I can have my house backline more so in the front. So that's what backline is. It's basically just a way of saying the gear on the stage. You could say gear, you could say our equipment, but that the technical term for it is backline. Now let's talk about some basic pieces of gear. So this guy right here and these speakers in the front of the stage are called monitors. Now, some people call them wedges. Like most people will label these types of speakers right here as wedges, but they are all called monitors. Now, what these basically do is each of these monitors has a direct aux send from the stage box from the mixer, and depending on how the venue lines up their aux sends, for instance, for this venue, this is 1, this is 2, this is 3, and that is 4. So we have 4 stage monitors here, which means we have 4 independent mixes that I can send from the console to the band. So that way when I'm doing a sound check, I say, hey, let me get the vocal. And when the singer is getting their voice out there, I usually get levels first for front of house. I make sure I'm good there. Then I send monitors. I start with the singer and then I ask, does anyone else need to hear center vocal? And I adjust whatever monitor is needed for this particular vocal. And I just repeat the process for every single input on stage. Now let's talk about line check. What is line check? Line check is when I am behind the console and I am making sure that the inputs are correct, the DIs are correct, all the signals are routed, everything is sounding good, and I am checking the signal. That's basically what line check is. 99.9% of the time, if a touring band is coming through here and the sound check is like at 4 p.m., and if the doors are like at 7 p.m., for example, that gives us a couple of hours of a window to make sure that we get a sound check and everyone is sounding great. And basically, when the sound check is complete, I save the settings in the mixer and I am able to bring that exact setting up later in the show. In the old days when we had everything done with analog boards, we literally had to write down the numbers of where everything was going to call back a mix setting for a band. It was a hassle, and I am so glad that digital technology exists for that very reason. Because I learned how to mix on analog, and trust me, I don't want to go back to that, and you definitely don't want to experience that either. Now for this next patch of stuff, let's start with some basic pieces of equipment. So this beat up thing right here is a microphone. We all know what a microphone is. The connection to this particular microphone, and quite honestly, almost every single microphone, is what is called an XLR. You can see it. These are the 3 pins that are coming out. This is an XLR male connection, which means you need the XLR female cable to plug in here. And this cable is routed to what this is, and this is called a stage box. This is connected through a cable connection we call Dante. Dante stands for Digital Audio Network through Ethernet. And basically what that means is behind this stage box is an Ethernet cable similar to how you used to hook up your computers back in the day. I'm dating myself here, but when you used to connect to the internet, you had an Ethernet cable that you plugged into your computer, into your internet modem, and that's how you connected to the internet. But an Ethernet cable is an extremely fast way of delivering data. It's used all over the place for live sound gigs. Next time you're at a gig, chances are they're going to have some yellow and black tracks that go from the stage to where front of house is. Underneath those protectors are a bunch of data cables that connect the front of house to the stage, because you wouldn't want a bunch of XLR cables running all the way to front of house. That would be crazy. So This is connected through a system called Dante, and the Ethernet cable is behind the stage box, and it gets routed underneath the stage through the walls to the console over there. The way that the signal flow goes: microphone source, XLR cable to the stage box, through Ethernet to the console, through more cables routed underneath to back of house right there, or backstage is our PA amplifiers, which then a bunch of big ass cables going from the amps underneath to our front of house main PA speakers right here. So this cable is connected to our amplifiers in the back of the stage area, and this is how the signal flow works in a music venue. Now, some mixers and some engineers and some venues will have a separate category just for subs, and here are our subwoofers underneath here. So normally some consoles will have left, right, sub. For this venue, we just have left and right linked together with sub. There is no right way to do this. There is no wrong way to do this. As long as it sounds good and you have the patch bays connected correctly, you should be good to go. So now I want to go into some more sound guy specific stuff on the console. And this is my mix from the show tonight, so let's reset that. Now, on the Behringer X32, which is the console that I use here, these are called scenes, but you can call them presets, you can call them saved settings. I just call them presets, and we go from there. So this is my default preset, and just like how I mentioned, we can save a setting after a sound check. I have my preset saved here so that this is a clean slate for whenever I come into work. I have my default mix settings where most of the time the EQ doesn't really need to be changed. But you never know. Sometimes a guitar player that thinks he's the next Dimebag Darrell comes in and the mids are so scooped, I have to do some EQ magic. But let's go over the basics of what a console looks like. Let's start with the cool little moving parts. These are called faders. And basically where the faders are, these faders basically control the levels. So if I want to raise the snare, I just raise the fader up. And there is that zero that is called unity gain. That's not to be confused with, let's go to a different menu here, the dynamics meter here. This is where I do all of my gain structure. Let's talk about gain structure. Gain is initial volume of the signal. So usually when I have a guitar player up there that inevitably is just blasting their amps way too loud, I tell them to turn down their amps, or I adjust the gain knob. What I like to do is I like to get my signals between -18 and -12. After that, I don't touch this knob unless it's absolutely necessary. I then make sure my compressor is working all good to the way that I want it, and then I unmute the channel and then pot up the fader to unity to see what it sounds like out here, and then I adjust accordingly. I repeat the process through every vocal chain. I then go to bass, and then I go to guitars, and then I do drums. And then that is the basic fundamental of my gain structure process to get to a mix. And I always have my master fader at unity. Sometimes I do this all the time. I sometimes push the vocal beyond unity just if I need a little extra volume, but most of the time I keep it at 0. And this is a basic layout of how I get my channels ready to go. I have these bussed out. What is a bus? A bus is, over here are my bus channels. Basically, if I wanted to, for instance, this channel is called drum verb. I pod this up, and then I can do one of two things. I can select the snare drum, for instance, and I can do bus sends 1 through 4, bus 1 through 4, bus 5 through 8, bus 9 through 12. This is bus 10, so I'm going to go to this channel, and then right here, 9, 10. And then I can adjust the send accordingly, and it will go to here. But what I like to do instead is I like to select this, sends on fader, and then I adjust the faders accordingly, so that whatever I adjust here is basically doing the same as adjusting on bus sends over here. I never use this. But now we're getting into basic techniques of how to do a mix instead of going over what this actually is. But so I'll stop there. But that is a bus. Let's talk about some basic fundamentals with this. The two main effects that you will always use are EQ and compression. EQ, you can basically sculpt the sound however you need, which for most of my guitar players out there, I put out a very aggressive high pass filter, a low pass filter, and I cut out a little bit of the 2K range. That's my usual go-to for dealing with guitars. See, here's my stock preset. If I have a guitar player go up, he most of the time will always have some annoying frequencies over here that just sound really, really bad. I find him, and then I just notch him out. This is what an EQ is. You basically can sculpt any sound you want with that. And then let's go to compression. What's a compressor? A compressor basically adjusts an audio signal so everything sounds a little bit more even. So if I have a very dynamic singer, with dynamics meaning that they sing either really high, really low, in the middle, a very wide dynamic range of their vocal, they're not consistent. That's what a compressor comes in. The threshold, which is the level of the volume of which the compressor is activated. So if I have a hot signal here, I will lower the threshold, the gain will be up here, and then the gain reduction meter, which is right here, will tell me how much dB, decibels, or volume is reduced from that signal. And then over here, I have what's called makeup gain. So for instance, if I go to the snare drum track over here, I like to compress everything drum-wise to -6 of gain reduction, with an attack being how fast the compressor activates, and release is how long it takes to release the signal. And the ratio right here is how aggressive the knee is, which is this little bend of this yellow line right here. The ratio is how aggressive the compressor works. So what I like to do with drums, I get a signal in, again, I'm between -18 and -12 initial gain input level. I adjust my compressor to where the drum signal is now -6 dB of gain reduction, with an attack of roughly 25, because I want the initial clap of the transient of the hit to come through uncompressed, and then the rest of the signal is compressed. So it's a nice, even, fatter tone. And then I release the signal at 30 milliseconds, and then because I reduce the input by 6 dB, I boost the makeup gain by 6 dB. And I repeat that same process for all my drums, and that is how I get my drum sound in this venue. You guys have seen me do my drum sounds in here. You've seen endless vlogs of me doing this. That's how I get my drum sound. And I repeat the process. Again, my techniques are exactly the same. I just adjust the attack, release, and how much compression it is on each signal. And then once this is all processed here, it gets sent to my buses, which is a reverb for my drums. This is a stereo delay for vocals, and this is just regular old reverb. I had a vocal boost here, but I don't use this anymore. And then these buses, combined with all the other signals, are routed to my master fader, and this fader is what everyone hears in front of house. So that's some basic fundamentals of what the console is like for all of you new sound guys out there, or sound guys in training. Now, if you guys would like, I can do an entire advanced course where I go about how I EQ everything, what I look for, what I want to hear in this venue. And to do that, I need a volunteer on drums. So if you're a drummer and you're local in the area and you would love to collaborate, hit me up and we could do some collaborations. But I cannot play drums unless it is on PlayStation Rock Band, and I'm actually pretty crappy at that too. So I can't play drums and also do front of house at the same time. So I would need a drummer. This right here, this beat up, aged workhorse monster is called a direct box. What this does is, you see the XLR signal on back, you plug an XLR cable to go to front of house, And then if you are a keyboard player, for instance, and you need a DI box because your instrument has a 1/4 inch output, a 1/4 inch being this type of cable, that cable would plug into the input of this DI box, and it would come out through the XLR with a clean signal into my stage box to come to front of house. Now, you may notice this through patch here. I encounter this most with bass players who come in with an amp from 1953 and they don't have an XLR direct out on the back of their amp. So what I do is I tell the bass player to put all their signals how they would normally go, except instead of going to their amp, they go to the input box, and then I would take a second 1/4 inch cable to go through the through patch and into their amp. So basically, this gets split. So the signal both goes direct to front of house in the back here, and it also gets rerouted to wherever else it needs to go. Example being the bass amp. There is no loss in volume unless I flip any of these switches right here. This reduces the signal by 15 dB or 30 dB. I always keep it at 0 because I want the raw signal. So this is a DI box. You will encounter this everywhere you go, and if you are a guitar player that has all their tones on like a Kemper box, or you want to go direct from their amp, you should have a DI box that you bring with you, because not every venue will have these or have enough if you are a band that has a lot of DI needs. So guys, that's it. I wanted to do just a quick video explaining some key core fundamental vocabulary terms that sound guys in training need to hear, on what new sound guys need to know going into their first gig, or if you're looking to get your first gig. And also, more importantly, what bands need to hear, what the sound guy is talking about, so that we are all on the same page in harmony so we can have a good show. I'm going to link below in the description an encyclopedia of other terms that I did not go over. There's tons of other terms, including decibels, ohmage, you know, all the other really, really good nerdy stuff that you all should take a deep dive in. I don't have enough time because I would be here for hours if I were to explain what every single thing means, but I will link it below so you guys can all check it out yourselves. That's it, guys. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.